Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Breaking Badness Cybersecurity Podcast. This episode covers part 2 of the panel discussion recently held on the foundations of DFIR. You are absolutely welcome to listen to this episode first, but I'd recommend listening to part 1 if you haven't already. This panel discusses the PICRO model, which is preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned in reviewing the foundations of a DFIR, which is digital forensics and incident response program. And that's crucial for effectively managing and mitigating cybersecurity incidents, yet they're often forgotten or overlooked. With that, Breaking Badness is next.
So now, containment. Well, what do we do about that?
I could give you more unpopular opinion.
Oh, go for it.
So containment. Yes, I'm all for containment. Containment is the part of the process where you say, I'm going to cut the adversary's access to the compromised assets off. So it's not fixing anything, but it's preventing it from getting worse while we buy ourselves time to do a more in-depth investigation and response plan and things like that. But I tell you, the one thing that I hear a lot, and this, I don't know exactly where this comes from, but I think it might come from commercial third-party incident response consultants, sorry, is not to do anything until you have investigated everything. Don't tip the adversaries off that you're onto them until you're ready to just roll through and sweep up their entire infrastructure in your organization. And I dislike that a lot. Like, it's bad. I think you should get in there and fight with them almost as soon as you can. I'm all about imposing costs on the threat actors and making them work harder. I can't stop them from doing what they're going to do, but I can hopefully make them pay for it with their time and effort. I've been in organizations where they followed that rule. They sat for weeks or months while their third-party IR consultants satisfied themselves that they knew everything, and then they came in on a weekend and just swept through the entire environment and remediated everything that they knew about, only to have that threat actor back because they didn't know about it. And then in the meantime, that threat actor probably consolidated their power over those weeks and months and became effectively impossible to totally eradicate. But as soon as you find them, do something about it. Shut it down. Set yourself like a goal. Hey, 1 hour to containment from the time that we look at that alert and say this is bad. Give yourself a little bit of time to do a reasonable first investigation to see if you can pivot around to find some more infrastructure real quick, but then shut it down. Like, maybe that won't work for everyone, but it works for most organizations. I think the biggest thing is if you have no confidence at all that you're able to actually find other things, then it might make sense to sit back and treat it as an intelligence gathering exercise. But definitely, like, they start stealing stuff, immediately turn them off. Do your best. Firewall, whatever. But I don't like it when people say, I'm gonna wait and get all my ducks in a row, because your ducks are they're never in a row, let alone all your ducks having been identified correctly.
I like something you said there, which was make their lives hard. I think a lot of people don't get that about the IR side of DFIR. Our job as threat intelligence analysts, as forensic analysts, as incident responders, is to try to make the adversaries' lives hard, because whether they're a state or they're a criminal organization, like, they have a budget to achieve a goal. And if you are massively making it beyond their budget and scope of work to achieve their goals, yes, there are some state adversaries who will try to get into your organization no matter what, at any cost, any level of resources, and they're going to do it eventually. You might slow them down enough that you can catch them in the kill chain early, but they're going to get in if they have unlimited time and resources. But a lot of adversaries do not have unlimited time and resources. If you make their lives hard enough, they'll move on to another target for money, for corporate data, whatever, or they'll come back with a different attack much later. So making the adversaries' lives hard is a rule to live by, especially in containment and eradication. And containment, again, I agree that it's a tough balance. It's an incredibly tough decision of when do you know enough to drop the hammer in containment. And containment looks different in a lot of different environments. In some facilities, it's still pulling a plug out of the wall. It's disconnecting the internet from the entire facility. And that makes things very straightforward if that's the only vector physically into the environment. In enterprise environments today, it's much more complicated with lots of cloud connectivity, things like that, vendor connection. connections. And then it becomes very hard to account for every single vector into your network and really do reliable containment of the whole thing. You have to look at chunks of it. You have to have plans. But the bottom line there is you have to have really good plans for containment. We've talked a lot about plans, note-taking, plans, testing those plans. Like containment is hard. It's paralysis point for a lot of organizations I see. It's people like knowing they need to contain, like David's, okay, go for it, lag it down, get them out. But like they know that you need to do that, but they also know that there's potentially a huge impact on their business by doing that. Like you're shutting off your internet perhaps, or shutting off a key server, you're taking yourself out of production. So there is a cost associated with it. And what you need to do with any risk decision like that is give the risk decision maker, name the risk decision maker, and give them good tools for making that decision. What is the threshold? What do we do? What is the impact of it? And that means that they don't feel like they're going to lose their job for making the containment decision because it was written down. It was said, you make this decision and it's based on these criteria. So good notes, good plans, technical plans, but also procedural and risk management plans for when you're going to do containment of individual critical assets or entire buildings or segments of your network, whatever that looks like in your environment. Plan for containment.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And this is where you hope you have somewhat experienced people that can inform that decision, even if you're not the senior decision maker, let's say a senior security person or somebody empowered in that vein. They have the experience themselves, great, but somebody's going to make the call. And if they have advice from people that have been through this a few times, is always feels a little bit better than a couple of junior people who are like, yeah, I think we got it under control now. Let's see what happens. Yeah. Sarah, I was curious what your thought is on how threat intelligence can inform the containment phase.
Yeah, I see CTI in this phase as like a proactive containment. We take what evidence is in front of us, what we see, what behaviors are on whatever system is compromised, infected, and kind of research, look at our threat intelligence. Do we know of any attributed threat clusters or any other behaviors that some other maybe Intel partners reporting that's similar? And then looking around that to see what other associated behaviors there are. Maybe there are a list of IP addresses that are like high fidelity, high confidence associated with this behavior or this single IP that we're seeing on our network and in this particular incident that we can proactively block all that. David mentioned the teams that want to sit back and watch and just wait and gather intelligence. I was like getting a little heartburn because that's the purpose of CTI is so that you don't have to do that, right? Like you should not have to do that. And that you shouldn't play your network as its own honeypot. That's not safe and not good. And as we know, threats are coming up with new tactics all the time. So you could be watching and collecting intel and leave it open and track them or whatever, and then shut it down. But you miss something. You miss a brand new tactic. You miss a new TTP that they were able to develop on your system, lateral movement using living off the land techniques, things like that, that we see every single day. And it's just, that is extremely dangerous. So I do love this stage for CTI support because we get to do that information gathering and really help to this is our chance to get ahead of the threat that's already in the network, get ahead of what they could potentially do down the line, impose more cost.
All right. Any final thoughts on containment?
Really good thoughts all around. Listen to this. If you're tuning in, listen to this advice. It's all really sound advice.
I don't know if it's a win or a failure story, but more years ago than I would like, but still in the 2000s. I was working in the CERT for a big multinational company, and we had a 1 hour containment policy. It was not from the security team, it was from the CISO, but we liked it, and it was like anywhere around the world. And so we had an incident. I don't even remember what the incident was. It wasn't super critical, I think, but we had an incident in a office building somewhere in, I want to say it was Mexico. We didn't have any on-site security people there, and they had a 1 hour containment, and their network engineers were gone and their system administrators were gone for the evening. And so the person in charge of the building decided there was no way that he was going to show up as red on the spreadsheet, that they didn't meet their containment goals. So called facilities management and asked them to shut power off at the entire building. Incident contained. So
It went dark.
Yeah, that was dedication. They had bought into it in a big way, and they were showing they were extremely willing. But it's a win because, yes, they met their goal under circumstances that most other people would not be able to meet their goal. But it's also a failure because we had not really planned for the fact that maybe there's circumstances in which they need a waiver or that it's not technically possible or not desirable for them to do that. But I made the call and they were like, I guess the business operations, if all the administrators had gone home, business operations couldn't have been impacted too much by turning the power off. But
A good use case for having, and I know every incident responder is going to roll their eyes and say no, but the after on call type of call tree, someone come back to the office, please, and do this so the business doesn't risk losing millions of dollars or whatnot. But sounds like in this scenario, it wasn't too bad, but
I mean, it wasn't for us. I don't know what it was like for them.
yeah.
I feel bad.
They expect incidents at 2 a.m. on Christmas because that's when they happen.
Oh,
In
yeah.
terms of being able to reach people and deal with people and not being available, like it's always the worst possible time.
Yeah, 4:30 p.m. on Fridays or the last day before the long weekends or holidays. That's when they all happen. It's uncanny.
That's
It's
why we
not- that's
pushed to
not like
prod on those
folklore.
days, right?
It's not folklore. It's because people don't want to call anybody until they absolutely can't handle it anymore, or they don't want it to be the big eye incident. They don't want to have to report it to regulators. Yeah, by the time it gets escalated, it's usually the end of the week when it's the last minute they can possibly contact somebody and they're desperate.
100%. Been there, done that. Ugh. All right, so that containment. Next step in Pickerel is eradication.
So eradication is removing changes that an adversary made to your network. And a lot of people skip it or they don't really understand how that's different than like recovery. And it's really important to call out those actions, even if you don't use the pickerel model. Like it's really important to remember that those actions are really important, especially as we're talking about like these adversaries that build long-term footholds and you might have contained them, but you didn't really destroy all their mechanisms to get into your host, command and control, things like that. And threat intelligence plays a huge part. I'm sure Sarah can talk about that in evaluating what their methods of persistence and command and control are. But it's really important. Like you can't necessarily rebuild your entire network, like a digital twin of your systems. So I've seen people do it. They've had to do it, especially in industrial and critical environments, build an entire new network and then swap over to it. But that's massively expensive. Most of the time, what people are doing, even in a major incident, is rebuilding portions, rebuilding bits, then uncontaining them and rebuilding some more bits, but keeping up everything they can possibly keep running by cleaning it, removing adversary changes, removing malware, removing tools, accounts, things like that. So really the things to understand there is how you're going to revert massive changes to your network without full reimages. And we'll talk about full reimages, of course, in recovery and talk about backups, but in eradication, it's like, how do you do mass account resets? How do you reset service accounts? How do you check a multitude of systems simultaneously with or without EDR for services, for network connections that shouldn't exist? How are you doing that from a technical and a logistical and a staffing perspective at a large scale in an inopportune time during a crisis?
This is also a stage where a root cause analysis will be really important too, because, and CTI folds into it as well with, again, intel sharing, research, intelligence gathering, RFIs from vendors, trying to learn what that first step was, the initial access. If it was a malicious email, is that email still sitting in 500 other inboxes? Are we going to have to go through this all over again the next day when someone opens it up and says, oh, nice, an Amazon gift card. This looks great. And there's another remote access Trojan and it all starts all over again. Or was it a vulnerability? Is it a fake update website that you got that you might need to go back through and or where a fake update pop-up, sock Golish, I've got sock Golish on the brain always. You just want to make sure you block it, things like that. So this is eradication is a fun one, I think, for where CTI can come in and help smash everything down. So there's no potential for another incident to kick off again and go through this again.
Yeah, eradication, in case you thought we were overselling the importance of planning early and preparation earlier. Like everything in eradication and even recover actually has the same, like they're so tailored to exactly what happened and exactly what the threat actor did that you don't have a step-by-step playbook. More you have guidelines about what you're supposed to do in certain circumstances. And so it comes to the planning, but the containment, the faster you can get the containment done, the more you have a time window to do the investigation to see what the appropriate plan for eradication and even recovery should be.
Yeah, I think this is where containment and eradication certainly joined at the hip. And from personal experience, I can tell you, you better be damn sure that your containment worked, because once you start eradicating and they're still in there and they're watching, it can get fun and not in a good way.
That's why I said earlier, contain as fast as possible unless you don't think you can find them again, because if you start eradicating them, they will have something else. Very likely in a lot of cases, they'll have something else like a backup C2 node in your environment or something that's going to come active. I have personally never worked with an adversary that I knew was trying to escalate like punitively. They just want to get their work done. We didn't really have to worry about enraging the adversary or pissing them off or anything like that. But I guess maybe that is a case in some, I don't know if either of you have seen that. Definitely try to get that by that time to make that good investigation so you can make the plan for eradication and then the recovery phase as well.
I was working an incident, I think it's long enough ago that can be talked about, where we discovered a cache of information that's being set up for exfil, nation state stuff. They stole it from other places in the org, deposited there, and then started to trickle it out. And as we started looking at it, I get a call from the NOC, and we're hit by a massive DDoS. And we're like, that's not good. So we had to shift our efforts and deal with that. And by the time we came back to the system, it had basically been wiped clean because nobody thought to unplug it when we responded to the other thing. So it's not a common thing, but if the information is worth it to them and they don't want to be detected, they'll go through some lengths and making magic happen.
I don't have experience with the like sneaky like threat actors that are like, oh, they're trying to get us, we're trying to get them backwards. But I could see like the next level of hacktivists getting into that realm and taking that like that battlefront in cyberspace and going after their targets and just really battling it on the systems. I could see that happening if I'm using my imagination, but that's interesting. But Daniel, what you just mentioned reminds me a little bit of what the Black Basta team is doing now. Like they are throwing these subscription bombs at people and then calling them via Teams at the same time, kind of just like hijacking the amygdala, which I love talking about that. It's a social engineering thing, a psychology thing. I learned about it from Dr. Bob. Shout out to Dr. Bob. And just taking advantage of that, making you anxious so you're not thinking. And next thing you know, you're downloading Screen Connect and and then ransomware. So there's very real risks out there of these multi-faceted attacks.
The triple extortion, the double, triple extortion that's so popular now, especially in the critical infrastructure environments I work on. They know how to terrify the customers of the businesses that get ransomed because they're doing critical things and they think that it's always going to be an implication on their life and safety if their electric provider or their manufacturing firm gets compromised. So there's a lot of that playing with the amygdala. I really like thinking about that aspect of it as well. It's really important to be aware of that people can be manipulated through those types of pressures very effectively, and that's why these scams work.
Well, I think eradication is one of those steps where at scale, you can get yourself in a lot of like resource trouble. So thinking beforehand, again, back to the planning phase, in case that you need to remediate 40,000 workstations or something like that, you're going to need help. And pre-identifying and ideally maybe putting down a retainer on some kind of vendor that can help you, depending how large your organization is and how big your staff is, I think is something worthwhile. And that's a hard one to discover after the fact, because if you're in the middle of an incident and you're asking for quotes for people to help you, they're like, ooh, and you're going to pay whatever I ask you to. So any thoughts on that? Any best practices?
Comes back to the planning. Like so much, I keep saying the same thing over and over again. Like it all comes back to the planning, because the planning is your playbook for every one of these other ones, right? And hopefully you have thought of that rather than you go through the incident and then it becomes a lesson learned that you should have done this.
There's certain things you have to do incident response. Like I have this conversation with like immature manufacturing companies a lot. If you don't have a network map, if you don't have basic understanding of where your log sources live, what hosts you have in an asset inventory, like I have to do that in day one. Like we have to do that. It's not us trying to get money at incident response hourly rates. It's we have to have that information to make good decisions during incident response. So yeah, it all comes back to preparation, but we're talking about building a plan now, but in your plan, make sure that any procedures that you put in eradication, and those should cover host eradication, they should cover server cloud eradication, network infrastructure eradication, make sure you test all those processes. And those are things you can drill as well. Can you make a firewall change quickly? Can you block an IP address? Can you make a GPO change across all of the domains that might be impacted by an incident? Can you change passwords at scale? Do you have a process for that? Have you tested it? Yeah, we all sound like a broken record right now, but like for eradication, there's a lot of different things that go into it. And like David says, you've got to make a plan, tactical plans for those things, and you have to test them out.
Also having a plan to test detections, right? If you have to, during this whole process, if you're building detections and you have IPS, IDS stuff going in, you don't want to push it right to prod. You have an environment where you can quickly test this and quickly get it into production so that you're preventing any potential other incidents or security alerts while you're in the in response mode and everybody's eyes are on this incident specifically. So having that environment, that capability as well. That'll also help you too in every day to have quickly put stuff through. But yeah.
I think that's an interesting point you just made, in that if you solely focus, if you're building a program and you're putting together a plan and all that kind of stuff, if you simply sell it on the worst case, like when an incident happens, which, let's face it, some of our non-security colleagues are skeptical. Oh, it's never going to happen. It will happen, just a matter of when. But being able to point at some of the efforts that, you know, is going to cost other people's time and resources, that there are additional benefits, not just for the worst case scenario, I think is a good lever to try to get buy-in from other entities. Hey, this will help you outside of incident response also. And if you can do some coalition building there, it's going to be more likely to be adopted rather than fought every step of the way.
You just touched on one of my favorite things to talk about, is that proactive incident response, where it's like almost like the sister or the sibling process, the opposite side of incident. It's to prevent an incident. And typically my experience with this type of process is using it in the face of active exploitation of a critical vulnerability that's being targeted to one of maybe an industry peer or something like that, or something that hits on our priority intelligence requirements. And that way you can mobilize quickly, maybe get protections in place, make sure if it's again, I go back to the Black Basta thing, because they are really on fire these days. Can you get a security awareness alert out to the whole organization quickly, and how fast can you do that? Maybe you want to open up a call and brief the company or brief some major stakeholders, like this is what's happening. This is what we're doing to prevent it before it actually becomes an incident for us. So having that in place, actually, a bold statement, but maybe hopefully prevent incidents in the future and keep your incident response team have more years on their lives of stress. So yeah,
only you can prevent incidents.
Exactly. I love that. I think it's a completely practical thing, and it's a maturity thing too. I think very mature organizations could easily implement something that is like a pre-incident type of process that looks like an incident response process.
All right, so that's eradication. So recovery is the step 5 of PICR.
We're all going to talk about backups.
Everybody has them. Nobody tests them. Oh, wait, they don't restore?
Some people don't even have them. Yeah. Backups are an easy thing that you say you have because you've installed some agent-based backup utility. Nobody tests them. Nobody makes sure it's installed on everybody. Nobody thinks about the systems that it isn't installed on. And nobody is very careful about making sure that they're not in a place that can also get ransomed too. So when we're talking about ransomware, backups are really critical, but they're critical for all types of different incidents, because adversaries even conducting espionage often break things, critical things, legacy things that don't have backups, that the person who installed them died. So backups are vital to test, and don't make assumptions about what works and what doesn't work and what is documented and isn't documented in your environment. You have to trust but verify. Backups are the difference between having a 1-day incident and a 2-month incident. It's just ludicrous at this point.
Yeah, in terms of backups, more and more there's Security standards call for, of course, encrypting your backups, because you got to make sure that data is all protected where it is. Key management all of a sudden matters more than ever. So you're running your encryption process during the backup, and then it comes to restore, and you're like, oh, wait, the key. Especially if you're ideally using symmetric encryption, then they're the same. But I've seen some scenarios where there's some elaborate thing with asymmetric and nobody has the private key. Oh, you have all of this data where you thought you backed up. I bet you never tested this because you would know that you didn't have the key. It's very unfortunate when you come to that realization. Any more thoughts on what's your favorite backup story or not so favorite?
I don't want to name any company names especially because I was not involved in this. I just read about this in the media, but a few years ago, you probably all would recognize them if I said their name. They had a ransomware incident, did not have any backups of their Active Directory, but every single one of their Active Directory thing around the world got ransomed, got encrypted, except for the one somewhere in a different continent that was offline at the time. And so they had to fly somebody out there to get a copy of that database and bring it back to re-import it. That was like the luckiest thing that could have happened to them in that situation. And it was all because I don't know if they didn't have backups or, as you said, they didn't work right or whatever, but it's stories like that that we can all learn from to make sure that hopefully that never happens to us.
I always think of like the hospitals and healthcare stuff when they get ransomware or their incidents happen and backups, and everything gets hit in that scenario. And just how do they, and I don't have the answer to this, and I don't have experience with a healthcare incident directly, but how do they even begin to back up anything? And that alone is, I think, a really important lesson, and just should be a big flag to everybody. Like, this is what could happen, right? This is the extent of an incident. So make those copies and save that, or have those backups and save them in a very secure place. Just have the chain of custody and all that stuff for who touches them and who has access to them and who can test them and how often you test them and so on. So I always just think healthcare with all of that and how dangerous that could be. It really does come down to life and death for some scenarios.
Yeah. And I would say for the backup, certainly a part of it, because by the time you have to restore something from backups, you likely have to rebuild those systems as well. So think about all the little things that the administrators who built that system had to make a choice every time they click on a screen, or which of the 7 options are enabled. So it's not just the backups. It may also be like the procedures for how do I build this system again if I need to? Like, it has burned to the ground. How do I bring the thing back with the same configuration options so that the backups that I have will actually work correctly and things will come back online and work the same way they did before?
And again, those supplemental devices like infrastructure and network equipment, industrial devices, how do you vet that they've been modified? Yeah, a lot of these attackers are just doing espionage, or they're only interested in Windows systems. But it's very easy to break things when you're screwing around in a network you have no authorization to be in. So how are you going to vet that things are still at the original configuration? And if necessary, restore those from a working configuration. So configuration management becomes vital there for like your network equipment, your lower level industrial devices, non-standard things like in medical environments. Where is your configuration management? Where do you keep that stuff? And how do you vet that things haven't been changed? And yeah, I mean, it is sometimes a incredible recovery is a huge task, something that you must have an idea of how when you're talking about recoveries. Adversaries move fast. When we're talking about ransomware alone, we're talking about destruction of your network if you don't contain somehow very rapidly within a few hours. Within a few hours, that segment or that facility, that portion of your network is toast if there's vulnerable systems and the adversaries know what they're doing. So it's a huge recovery effort. Worst case ransomware scenarios, which can happen to anyone, are huge recovery efforts. And you oftentimes don't have the staffing internally to do that. So not only do you need guidance from the people who did analysis of your eradication, you probably need like money and budget and planning for what personnel you're going to bring in from a third-party contractor to do those massive scale, like hospital recovery efforts. Like I live in Chicago, and our hospital system got horribly ransomed, and I mean, it's bringing all the contractors in the known universe to try to do a recovery effort in medical systems. Like a lot of them had to be rebuilt, a lot of them weren't backed up. And then just the scale of standalone systems and legacy systems there requires a massive force of on the ground people. So if you are in a situation where that might be the case, if you lost a large portion of even your Windows computers, you better have a plan with your insurance and your logistical planning for who you're going to call in rapidly to do that kind of recovery.
Yeah, having worked in research setting and also medical adjacent, some of these devices, multi-million dollars, and get run by some embedded Windows that hasn't been patched in 10 years. And if I hear one more time, we couldn't patch it because it would lose its HIPAA certification, I'm like, read that again. That's not how this works. That's not an excuse. And when it does get owned, like, good luck restoring that.
Though there are some things that, especially in industrial, like life and safety equipment, if you patch them, there can be an unpredictable result in how they operate. They're no longer supported by warranty by the vendor. They aren't operating in the field tested or a vendor tested, factory tested form. And there are cases with those legacy systems, just playing devil's advocate here, where they will never be patched because they were built safely to operate on Windows 3.1 in 1990, and that vendor's gone out of business, and you don't know what's going to happen to the weird mechanical operations and connections to serial that occur on that system if you upgrade it to Windows 11. So life and safety concerns are definitely an exception to that. And that requires you thinking through mitigations all the way around those computers.
Yeah, I completely agree. So that's an entirely fair point. Also, I like the early 90s when this sort of rush of industrial controls to become internet connected. I used to be serial bus and pretty hard unless you got physical access to do something with it. And then everybody wanted to slap a controller on it and connect to the internet because it was cool. And we're still paying for that 20 some years later.
Now the new thing is put AI in everything, and that introduced. It's been an hour. We haven't even said AI yet, so I think that's a record. But I think that introduces a whole new aspect, probably to incident response as well. So something for folks to think about it. We don't have to talk about it here, but just throwing that out there, it's a whole new factor.
Yeah, AI used for red teaming. A lot of stuff has been cleaned up. It was like, oh, I didn't have a API key or a license key for this following product. Guess what? I can ask AI and it's going to find me one because somebody put it in code somewhere. I'm a little bit surprised, not to go too far off of a tangent, but like that we haven't seen even more AI being used in like crafting phishing messages, etc. We used to tell people like, oh, look for spelling mistakes or awkward use of language. You'd think by now that would have been completely supplanted with AI generated stuff, but I still see pretty frequent poorly crafted messages. So not sure what's going on there.
Yeah, AI is not perfect, as we know as technologists. I don't think the rest of the world thinks that at this point, but AI is not perfect now. But we do see like AI generated code that you can identify pretty well. And certainly some of the phishing lures are getting a lot better, I will say, as somebody who looks at BEC and fraud stuff specifically and toads, they are getting better, but that really doesn't change how we as researchers detect them. There's still language, they're still saying the same things, but they just look a little bit better. But yeah.
Next step is lessons learned. I think this is one that is very often overlooked and is actually, in my mind, one of the most important ones if you've actually gone through an incident, because otherwise the whole thing might have been for naught. But curious about what everybody else thinks about that.
It is the part of this whole cycle that drives the continuous improvement aspect of security. Like, it is often skipped because they're like, okay, we've recovered. It's the picker model, not we've recovered. And then we can breathe again, and then they take a break, and then they never follow through with the lessons learned. But it's the lessons learned piece that keeps you from having it again 3 weeks from now, right? What happened? Why did it happen? And what are we going to do about it? There's way more things, but those are the top 3 buckets of information. What happened? Why did it happen, and how are we going to keep it from happening to us again? Let's feed that back into the process through the CTI team. I'm sure Sarah has lots of thoughts about that, but I've always found that this is the best source of cyber threat intelligence data that you can get, is stuff that's actually happening and you're directly observing.
Yes, I love this is probably my favorite step because this is when we can actually like illustrate the whole attack chain and fill in all the gaps and do the reporting and write the research. And when allowed, we can share it with our close industry partners to say, hey, this happened. Here you are, what you can share, of course, when it's sanitized. But this really this allows us to create that bigger picture and start building on it as well and look for gaps. And maybe we can share this with Red Team in the future and work that angle and feed it into the tabletop exercises again. Not that you want to have deja vu for everybody. I'm sure by the end of the incident, it's a nightmare, but could it happen again? And would it be effective again? Because you never want to assume just because you made it through that it won't happen again, just the same way.
Perspective, I really recommend that you do reviews of the types of cases you have, the adversary groups in question, and see if there's trends. Oftentimes there are long-term compromises in environments, and we don't realize that they are really the same incident or the same vector in, especially when a root cause analysis doesn't really tell us about the initial intrusion vector, which is sometimes the case. Like a lot of incidents are still long-term, months, years. So do look for those commonalities, do look for trends in activity groups, in TTPs, in even locations, et cetera, to try to find those commonalities to see if there's a long-term persistence or vulnerability problem.
On that note, I'd love to talk about this too. We see a lot of threat actors that work together, some spam brokers working with those towing the line of an initial access broker type of situation or a payload controller. So yes, looking at the threat actors and the adversaries to establish that really long-term potential and the patterns, that's huge. I call it the business of being bad. It's like a B2B situation on the threat landscape. I swear we all have our own bad doppelgangers, like our bad cyber actor doppelgangers in the underground. So
yeah, I think the lessons learned part, I mean, we all agree here how important it is, but I think in reality, it often gets deprioritized, got to move on, there's bigger fish to fry. And in my opinion, that's a huge mistake. I spent some years in the US Army, and everything you did, you do an hour after action review, and you follow a certain pattern. And there's different methodologies for these, but adopting such a thing, making sure they happened, and actually answering the questions so you don't not on the spot thinking like, oh, okay, so what did we learn here? Having a plan, once again, planning, having a plan for how to do a proper lessons learned after action review. What are the questions you need to have answered? And figuring out who should be included. Just like in the incident response, there's roles. If you participated and worked on this incident, maybe you should at least be asked for the after action review, like, what was your view on this? Did we do as we said we were going to do? Accepting input. And this is, I think, where it gets difficult in a distributed situation, distributed company, because getting all these people after the fact back together, you're going to get pushback. That's expensive. They have other things to do. So really trying to make sure that process is followed is super critical. I wonder if anybody has any thoughts on like how to incentivize or make sure those things can happen. Anything that you've encountered that can work, that did work, or also some maybe not so successful stories so other people can think about that in their terms.
I think one of the things for me with my experience with incident responses, in my experience, I had a really good CISO, like a chief information security officer, who was very in tune with everything we were doing, and he always wanted that lessons learned report. And that was just coming from the top. That was the expectation. So nobody was really allowed to push back on it because that's how we have closure. That's how we close everything. And again, that's how we prove if you are audited and you talk to the regulators, that's how we prove we did what we needed to be done and we closed it out, and it was stamped by everybody from the CISO down to senior manager of the SOC. So just having that top-down voice and leverage really is helpful. Again, that goes with the executive buy-in too.
And something, Daniel, that you said about nobody wants to stick around to write the report after. I think what a lot of people don't understand is if you wait to write the report until after, you're setting yourself up for a lot of extra work. So I teach network forensics for SANS. And one of the things at the end of the class, we have a capstone where it's like independent team-based investigation. And I'll say the same thing I always tell my students: don't wait until the last couple of hours to start writing your report. You write your reports while you're doing the investigation and you fill in pieces. Like you're not writing the entire report and then rewriting it over again. You're just filling in pieces. Even if it's just like you're putting it in your case management notes, and you're also in your planning, you are planning for periodic status updates to your stakeholders and your management, right? So you're creating those things at the end. When you have done that work throughout the entire incident response lifecycle, ideally the burden of reporting should not be as bad because you have a lot of stuff that has already been written, and you have to maybe cut and paste some of it together or make sure it flows and you've covered all the bases, because there are some things like you can't do root cause analyses during the incident, most likely. You don't have to start over from scratch and be like, now we're done and we're going to start this new big part of the project. Like you already have a lot of things to work with, ideally.
Just as we were going through this, I was like mentally comparing to like our internal plan and all those things. And I'm like, you know what? There's still a few things that there's always room for improvement. I was like, oh, wait a second. That's an important point. I need to make a mental note and go back and circle back and look at our plan and maybe make some changes. I think that's the key thing. A lot of people treat policies and plans like that like they're dead documents. Once you write them, you never have to look at them again until, there is an incident, whatever. And I think that's a terrible approach. You should continuous improvement applies to all those things. That's why most standards call for policies and stuff like that to be reviewed at least annually or as conditions warrant. Something changed, you had an incident, yeah, look at it again, try to make it better, like continuously keep an eye on that and keep enhancing it, because it'll make you better, it'll make the organization better. And are you going to get it perfect? Unlikely, but perfect is also the enemy of good. Trying to keep at it and improving things will help everybody along the way, and hopefully will, when an incident happens, make it not as painful as it otherwise could have been.
Yeah, and the lessons that you get from your lessons learned are not only about the security thing that happened, like whatever the threat actor did. It's also about what worked well in your response or what worked poorly in your response. And so, yeah, you might find that you're updating playbooks or changing your incident response plan because there was a deficiency or something could have worked better. You could have interdicted earlier or something like that. So, yeah, it's continuous improvement in the whole thing. It's not just like I need to make an IT change all the time.
Could also be used as a good use case for, hey, we should invest in this new tool to add to our toolbox, or maybe we need some more headcount, like thinking about it from the business perspective. You can get a lot of mileage out of a lessons learned report beyond what you think you do need. So maybe it's justification for investing in getting additional logs that perhaps you have a blind spot on, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so we've talked about the 6 steps, but I feel like each one of them we could probably have another half-hour sidebar conversation. But so before we wrap, I'm curious if anybody has any. People love a good story. If we can talk about it in sufficiently anonymous terms, any sort of war stories that people want to maybe share about. I always love hearing them, so I'm pretty sure our audience will be interested in that too.
I think it's less of a war story of an individual case, but everybody thinks it's not going to happen to them. So 2 things that I perpetually see as a consultant who does incident response, especially in critical systems. First of all, nobody thinks it's going to happen to them. The big companies think that they're too well resourced to ever have a major incident, but they're hard to manage. They have huge landscapes to cover, and of course they have incidents. And the small businesses think they're not going to be targets. And of course, they're targets of opportunity, and also they're sometimes test beds for attacks against larger organizations, or they're used for supply chain attacks. So nobody's immune. It can happen to anybody. And the other thing that I see happen is the blame game. Like, people blame themselves and they blame their security personnel when they have an incident. And really, again, this is something that can and will happen to any organization. Again, you are a deterrent. You try to make the adversary's lives hard, but eventually somebody will make it through to some extent. And really what you should be looking at from a metrics of success there is, how well did you deter them? How fast did you detect them? Did you do the basic essential things that you were obligated to from a legislation and regulatory perspective, and then also from the best cybersecurity practices for your industry, critical controls, et cetera? Did you do those things that you were responsible for effectively? And then did you deter the adversary as such? And if they still got in after that, like, again, I've gotten plenty of panicked and crying and angry people calling me, talking about firing their CISO after an incident, talking about firing their security director. And it's very misplaced anger during a time of intense stress for people. Expect it to happen. Let your measures of success be related to how long you kept them out, how valiantly you fought to keep them out, how well you followed best practices, instead of, oh, we got compromised, so everybody failed.
In some cases, you can tie that to how much money you actually prevented from walking out the firewall door. That's a bit of a mixed metaphor, but because the earlier you interdict, you can say this could have been worse and it could have cost us this much money, but we cut them off, right? We proved some value here. You might not have hard numbers, but sometimes just showing the value, and it's not just, you're not just doing this for busy work.
There's a reputational risk aspect to it as well for any organization. But going back to something that Lesley pointed out at the beginning of this, with regards to developing an incident response plan and having that scope very well established. I won't say this is a war story or anything, but if you don't have a scope established, anything will be an incident to your executives. Their email address showing up on the dark web, you're going to get a call at 3 a.m. about that. Just literally anything will become an incident, and you're going to really regret not having that plan and that scope and establishing the expectations in the role of this plan or when it gets kicked off. So it's very important to have the IRP ready to rock and roll so you can point to it and have everybody sign off on it.
Taking advantage of this is all saying never let a good incident go to waste. Once you make your way through it, it sometimes can be an opportunity to get some more resources if you did a reasonably good job. I wish there was a way we could, as an industry, remove the stigma. Like, breach happens, and how you respond to it matters a lot, how you come out on the other end. I have fired vendors before because they had a breach and they did a horrible job managing that. As somebody who has worked them, I am very sympathetic that this happened, even if you tried hard. But if you try to cover it up or you try to do something shady or whatnot, I will fire you in a heartbeat. And I would expect any of my customers to do the same thing. So I think decoupling this from, yes, it's bad that this happened, but you fought valiantly, you did a good job containing it, and you communicated about this appropriately. There was in the last couple of years, there were some major incidents, and some vendors came out very well because they did the right thing, and some really, screwed it, and that matters. So I think as an industry, trying to remove the stigma would be useful, but I'm not sure we always can do. Obviously, like publicly traded companies, stock prices are to worry about, etc. But there's a company I'm not going to name who had a big incident and their stock tanked for a bit, but they did in my opinion, really good job handling it, communicating about it, and the stock rebounded. So you can make it through this by doing the right thing, or you can really make your reputation a lot worse.
The industry could use a lot more empathy, I think. We have an unofficial motto at Point called email and empathy. Just everybody's going to click on a bad email at least once in their life, no matter how experienced you are. Just the threat actors are tricky and they are determined, and some of them are incredibly well resourced. And it does not matter how many millions of dollars you throw at your security stack every single year. Where there's a will, there's a way. And I always say too, they're going to take what we've grown to use in our day-to-day business and they'll use it against us, which makes it even trickier, and it's not getting any easier. So remember empathy. I know it's a soft word, but try to be empathetic to people and companies. We're all doing our best here, and certainly nobody is ignoring security for sure, especially cyber.
Yeah, I think this is such an important point. I wrote an article about this, or a post probably 6 or 7 years ago, and why empathy is important and matters, and I stand by this today. For example, this is my professional opinion. People can disagree with me, but I will not test fish my users. I don't believe in that. It's shaming people. It creates the wrong habits. I know there's a whole industry that makes money doing that. Fine, whatever. I'm not going to pay you money for it, because when somebody gets caught, they feel bad, and all it's going to do the next time, they're going to try to hide it better. I'd rather be sympathetic and be like, hey, it sucks this happened, let's clean this up. Next time around, they'll be the first ones to be like, hey, I saw something, like maybe we should look at this. trying to shame people or put them on the spot creates exactly the opposite effect in that mind. So being sympathetic, the person who thought they maybe caught a breach or were somehow related, they already feel bad enough. You don't need to beat them when they're down, but you still need their help. So by being empathetic and be like, okay, this sucks, but let's figure out how to come out of this together, I think in my mind is a really important part that's not necessarily practiced enough in our industry. I really appreciate everybody offering their views and their professional opinions.
I would like to say I appreciate Lesley keeping us honest several times. Aren't we going to talk about this?
Yes, 100%.
No, I think it's just start somewhere. I know a lot of people probably listen to this. I know it's a long thing to listen to, but I know it feels overwhelming right now. And we gave you a lot of things that we think is really important, but start somewhere. Like, really don't just download a plan off the internet. Really think about each one of these sections. Anything that you add, any of these things you accomplish is going to make your life easier when you have an incident. It's going to help you, I promise. And you don't have to do it all at once.
Don't leave out your CTI team, your friendly CTI folks.
And I think that people who just listen to us, who maybe at the very beginning, they're like, yeah, we need a plan and figure out what to do, but they're staring at a blank page and it's so overwhelming. Been there, done that. I'm a big believer in professional networking. If you can do that, talk to people. Most of us are more than willing to share our experiences. We don't bite. You can reach out to us on the socials and whatnot, and at a conference, run into you. I'll talk your ear off about incident response all day long. Your mileage may vary, but I think we as professionals, especially in the junior side, maybe sometimes are afraid to admit what we don't know. And that makes your life so much harder. I have learned the most from more senior people over my career just by asking questions. And as long as you're being respectful and not demanding, most of them love talking about it because we're in this to a degree for the money, but also because of the interest that we have in this. And talking about it, I think, is pretty natural. So if you're finding yourself in a situation where you're sitting there and you're staring at the blank page and you don't even know where to start, yeah, there's a lot of stuff online, but you also got to take it with a grain of salt with everything. By having conversations with professionals that know a thing about it too, and a lot of us have learned the hard way in certain situations, make use of those resources. But don't be afraid to ask. Worst case, somebody says, sorry, I don't have time right now. But chances are they're like, yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, it sounds weird, but sometimes people are reluctant to ask for help or questions or how do I approach this because they don't want to seem like they don't know the answer, like it's a sign of weakness and vulnerability. But sometimes actually having the confidence to work through that is a sign of strength. So always ask. If you have questions and you can't figure it out in a reasonable amount of time, ask. Somebody will that person will be like, oh, it's great that they reached out and they didn't spend 5 days wasting time trying to figure that out. Especially in an incident response kind of thing, you don't have that. Like, every incident response team is composed of people who have different skills and sets of knowledge and backgrounds. And it's actually, you should normalize asking questions and collaborating with others. There's literally should be no one person in your organization who just works everything by themselves.
Things happen so fast in this industry too that it's almost impossible to know even like 75% of everything, like 50% of everything. So even just being on this call, I've learned a lot of new things from Lesley and from David, from Daniel. So imposter syndrome is a totally normal thing, even if you've been in the industry for a couple decades or a couple years. That's a normal thing, and I think it's healthy, but it should not keep you from exploring and asking questions and staying curious. Huge thing. Stay curious, ask questions. I love talking. I love answering questions. If anybody ever wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn or wherever, if you see me at a conference or whatnot, I'm always happy to talk about this, animals, incident response, CTI, anything.
Well, I want to thank all of you, Lesley, Sarah, David. This has been fantastic. Time flew by, but I think we had really great conversations and hopefully people will get something out of that, and very much appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Such a huge pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for that wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for listening to part 2 of the panel discussion. I'll defer to you, getting back to the foundations of DFIR. We're interested in what you thought of the discussion. Leave comments and questions for us on our YouTube channel. Thanks again for listening, and we will catch you next time for another all-new episode of Breaking Badness.
That's about all we have for this week. You can find us on Twitter @DomainTools. All of the articles mentioned today will be included in our blog post, which can be found at blog.domaintools.com. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we publish our podcast and blog. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on another episode of Breaking Badness. Until then, remember, don't drink and click.